Lorna? Meeting to order. Welcome to the regular meeting of the West Hartford Public Schools Board of Education for March 16th, 2021. Cammie, can you please call the roll?
Ms. Aronson,
Present.
Dr. Chang,
Here.
Ms. Poland,
Here.
Dr. Steinberg,
Here.
Dr. Thomas Farquharson,
Here.
Ms. Wilcox,
Here.
Mr. Zdanowitz,
Here.
Student Representative Lillian Sweeney,
Here.
Rochelle Yarabelli.
Here.
Thank you. Lily, would you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We do not have any revision to the agenda order, but we do have people who've signed up for public comment. As a reminder, this is an opportunity for members of the public to provide commentary to the Board of Education. Each person speaking will have 3 minutes, and we'll set aside 21 minutes per topic area. So I will call you in the order in which you've signed up. And the first person is Yukio Aida. Good evening, Yukio. If you could start by just giving us your name and address, and then we'll start the 3 minutes.
Great, thank you. My name is Yukio Ida, and my address is 63 Highwood Road. I'm a parent of a RLE 7th grader and a parent leader in the West Hartford Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Group. First, thank you all for the difficult task of going through the school budget, especially during this continued pandemic and figuring out the reopening schools again, and with the uncertainty of federal, state, and local funding to support our children's growth. And as the Board of Ed and Superintendent Moore have mentioned multiple times that you fund what you value, I look forward to hearing more at tomorrow's budget workshop to understand how this budget is reflecting your commitment to being an anti-racist district and ensuring racial and educational equity in our schools. But tonight I'm calling today actually on a more personal level. I have been highly invested and really supportive of the work that is coming out of EDC and the Office of Equity Advancement under the leadership of Dr. Rosina Haskins. And I'm really enjoying the fact that the district and educators are open to collaborating with families and getting input from families of color and families of various identities to ensure that their curriculum and experiences for the children are really diverse, well thought out, and full and authentic. So I really appreciate and feel like I am in the know about a lot of things that are happening in the district. But I just want to take your attention to a recent messaging that came out from the Office of Equity Advancement. And I don't think this is a message that should just fall under the Office of Equity Advancement, and that it is really a message that needed to come out from Superintendent Moore. And the message that I am referring to is the message that West Hartford Public School reaffirms Asian solidarity and condemns anti-Asian racism. And the intention of the message, I understand, is great. And, in the continued pandemic and the continued rise in anti-Asian racism, this message needed to be out there. But unfortunately, the impact that this message and the way that it was communicated, and that the fact that it did not come out as a standalone message from Superintendent Moore, sends a message that this issue around anti-Asian racism and the violence that some of our community members are experiencing is not important enough to warrant a standalone message from the top leader of this district. And, as much as we value the district and being anti-racist, and being anti-racist means that we need to continue to reevaluate our practices and policies. And I am pointing out tonight that this practice of not communicating this message to our community, our Asian American community, it sends a message that this is not worth putting out there in a way that everyone sees and that everyone understands that leadership really stands behind this message. So please, as a district that has declared to be anti-racist, I urge you to continue to look at your practices and ensure that everyone is being valued in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Rebecca Seaton.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Rebecca. I'm Rebecca Seaton, and I live at 87 Hunter Drive. My 3 children attend Conard, and our family feels very fortunate to be able to choose for our kids to be back to school all in person this week. So thank you for your leadership to manage everything involved in getting our district safely to this point. It's remarkable to think about what has happened since last March. Our family has experienced our share of stress. However, we do not cope with race-related stress and trauma day in and day out, like some of you and our friends, neighbors, kids, classmates, their families, and school staff. I'm commenting to echo Yukio's comments and to emphasize the importance of consistent direct messages of public support from top leadership to members of our school community who experience racism. And as Yukio mentioned, recently the Office of Equity Advancement posted a message about Asian solidarity and condemning anti-Asian racism because of the increase in harassment and violence in the news since January. And the link was very important to a very important message, which was included in some principals' newsletters, but not all yet. And we know each school has a lot of information to share with families, but having the message be a link from a separate department with no context for what it was about makes supporting our AAPI community members seem like a secondary exercise. You all have declared your commitment to be actively anti-racist in thoughts and actions, and many things that you are doing bear this out. The district's consistent and clear anti-racism public messaging is also very important for this work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Julia Carabillo.
Hi. Hi, this is my name
Hi.
is Julia Carabillo. My address is 89 Keeney Avenue. I'm a Brayburn parent. I noticed in a recent edition of the Brayburn School newsletter, there was a nondescript link out to the Office of Equity Advancement website to their message around anti-Asian racism. While I'm happy to see a statement was made at all, I am concerned that it came a year into a global pandemic that sparked incidents of anti-Asian racism and not contemporaneously with the rise in incidents, which I think may have been more impactful. Additionally, while I appreciate that the Office of Equity Advancement issued the statement and other statements made that reflect their anti-racism mission, it does not feel like that's an appropriate level of engagement for the community from the overall West Hartford public school system. I would like to see effective and consistent engagement across the district at the time of impact for those affected communities. And I would also like to see that engagement not just out of the Office of Equity Advancement, but also out of the superintendent's office, principals, and administrators. A unified voice amplifying the district's anti-racism message. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Gigi Bellen.
Hi, good evening. My name is Gigi Bellen. I live on Brennan Road and I have 4 children who currently attend Brayburn and Bristow. I do want to thank you all for your leadership and your efforts and hard work in keeping our children safe and in school. This past year has been extremely challenging for many and our family as well. And I'm so grateful for the consistency of a school schedule and the opportunity for my kids to be in school in person. I am also the co-founder of the Brayburn Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee and an active part of the West Hartford EDI group. I am part of the Parent Partnership curriculum groups that work with teachers and staff to give feedback on the social emotional learning and social justice education curriculum currently being implemented in the schools. So I consider myself well-informed and knowledgeable about the great work around equity and inclusion going on in West Hartford. So 2 weeks ago, on March 5th, I received an email with a link to the Bobcat's Tale, which is Brayburn's weekly school newsletter on SMORE. And it is full of information, notes from the principal, and information about what's going on in the school and in the district, and even news from the community. Within the newsletter is a section for the Office of Equity Advancement, a brief paragraph stating it is sharing events and programs for parents, caregivers, and students. And then below that, one line that was linked that read a message from the Office of Equity Advancement. This link led to the OED SMORE page, which led with the heading, an important message, and a statement reaffirming Asian solidarity. If you are not looking for this link, if you don't even open the newsletter and scroll through all the other stuff, you would miss this. And so I'm just wondering, what message does this communicate? And my daughter goes to Bristow, and I did not receive anything from Bristow that day, but did last Wednesday, and I received the Bristow update with the first paragraph highlighting the statement from the Office of Equity Advancement, along with a link to that SMORE page again. So I appreciate the context the principal gave and the prominence he gave as well, but I did find it odd that this message was sent out almost a week later. So this is personal for me. I am Asian American. My kids are biracial, and I wholeheartedly support the district and its efforts to be actively anti-racist. But the communication around anti-Asian racism has been telling. Nothing was sent out last year when Asian Americans were experiencing increased harassment and discrimination due to COVID. There was a brief mention in an email hesitating to mention any anti-Asian racism, but nothing to assure the community that they should feel supported. I know emails from the leadership convey the importance of the message, so when there's an email in your inbox from the superintendent, it is likely people will pay attention. The fact that this statement did not come from the superintendent's office is upsetting, and it certainly does communicate a message. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on the call who wishes to provide public comment this evening? If not, we will move on to our next item, which is unfinished business and the proposed calendar for the 2022-2023 school year. Looking for a motion that the Board of Education review as a second and final reading the proposed calendar for the 2022-23 school year. After we have a motion and a second, we can discuss. Is there a motion?
So moved. Ari Steinberg.
Thank you, Ari. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Liz. All right, discussion. I don't know if you wanted to chime in with anything here, or is there anything new to tell us other than what we already know?
No, pretty much same discussion we went through. The things we talked about last time. There are some contracts that would be affected by Columbus Day. We'd have to open up the schedule. Besides that, pretty much what we had said last time.
So if there are any motions for any amendments, now would be the time to make those, and we can have discussions and votes on those separately, if anybody would like to do that.
Deb, again, I'm having a hard time getting to the question mark up there. I don't know why.
It's okay. By the time you get perfect at it, we'll be meeting in person again.
Yeah, I don't know. I went to go do something and then my screen changed. So, but I had made a motion last time and we opened discussion. I don't know if I have to reopen that motion about Columbus Day.
You would need to you would need to make that motion again.
All right. So I make a motion that we eliminate Indigenous Peoples Day or as a holiday and have it in school that day, and it would be open for discussion. I'm looking for a second.
All right, is there a second to that? I'll second it so that we can have the discussion. So I think Mark's put the question out there. Does anyone have any commentary on this item? Amanda.
Hi. Well, I really appreciated this coming up at our last meeting because, it really gave us a chance to put our heads on the calendar in a deliberate way. And I would say just in general, I hesitate in all situations to change a part of something without having ample time to look at how it's going to affect the whole of something. So for that reason, I'm in favor of waiting to a later time to make any major adjustments. But the reasons why were because as I went through this, we really look at what a calendar does. And our particular calendar, it's hard working. It's creating time for us to have restorative breaks, not just for the students and their families, but also for the teachers. And, that in and of itself is its own question about what constitutes a restorative break and when that's helpful to have. We've got time, in the spring when our seniors travel, sometimes through the music department, to they do international trips. Other departments have kids traveling throughout the world to expand their worldview when that becomes an option again. We've got, families who, my family lives 20 minutes away, so I can see them, whenever, in normal times, whenever I want. But for most people, they use those vacation times to go and travel to other areas to see families. And then holidays specifically really do and should reflect the culture of the community. So our calendar has sort of developed over time, but I don't know that we've had a chance to really look at it in its entirety. So, some communities will have 3 Kings Days off, and so they can have community celebrations and they can gather, and that's reflective of the community. Some have Diwali off, some have in Boston, we had St. Patrick's Day off, or if the Red Sox won. But when I lived in Michigan, the opening day of hunting season, those kind of days, not going to resonate here, I don't think. But, looking at our community, as we can hear, even in this conversation tonight, we have so many cultures in our community that are going to want, we can harness an opportunity through something like the calendar conversation to really think about which cultures we can elevate and which conversations we can have as a community, and taking days off to, decide which ones are in person, like say Veterans Day, where we can have a thoughtful time together to look at that. Other days when we want to have things in the community that people can attend. So I think that we would be missing an opportunity that would be special to, especially through the equity lens and the cultural celebrations that we have in our community, to really look at the whole thing. So for that reason, I prefer to keep it as is for now, and then take a look at it. I know a number of different things came up about the calendar, and I just think also for our teachers who, their minds are on saving our kids right now. And I think that to ask them to think about the calendar and some of the other ways we wanted to talk about it too, not just through Indigenous Peoples Day, but through February break or perhaps the end of the year, they just might not be, in the mind space to do that right now. So those are just my thoughts, but I appreciated the thought to bring it up. And for me, it just prompted so many other questions that I would just rather wait and be able to have a more robust look at the whole thing.
Thank you. Mark.
So Amanda, I'm curious, and you said how long in a robust, this was opened up and it was opened up for discussion so that we can come to today's meeting to have that robust discussion. And you're saying, no, wait, let's wait another year. How much time do you need to talk about it and discuss it? I'm just curious because I thought this was longer than normal for a calendar. And I'm just curious that if we're going to make motions, I want to get a feel for the group and how long do we wait a year? Is it a year to deliberate this, or can we have a robust conversation while we sit in a meeting like we do today? And then the other thing that was talked about was that, you talked about Veterans Day and happen to be a veteran, and we do a lot of discussion about Veterans Day, and they do teach on, and they have programs. Columbus Day, or as we on our calendar, Indigenous People Day, get lost with a day off and potentially college visits. So there's no thought process or any curriculum behind Native Americans and even Columbus or any of the people that founded North America and things like that, and the discussion around that. So I'm curious, how long of a discussion do we need? How long do we need to do we have to put this on hold for another couple of months before we sit on the calendar? I'm just curious.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And I know there's a lot of people too, when looking at breaks, they just want to know kind of where we're going with that. But I think it just triggered the thinking behind, if we adjust one day and we have, say we remove it as a holiday. I know our intention, especially with our anti-racism lane that we are, driving steadily down, we don't want to limit any of our content areas to holidays and special days. because say a child misses the day, we don't want to set up our curriculum in a way that they miss that content. So I know that our overall goal is to incorporate learning at a much deeper level throughout the year, but it just to make one change without thinking, well, why that day? What if we had another day? How many days do we need? Some people talked about needing more time at the end of the year to better align some things going on with seniors. So, and their end of the year activities, there's conversation about that. So another important part of this that was raised at the last meeting was for working parents, the private schools have 2 weeks off together, and that's for all kinds of reasons. But in public systems, we don't tend to do that, and in large part because it creates a real struggle for people who are not traveling and organizing programming. But to make that decision based on an assumption and not based on data, we did a survey as we learned about this, a couple of years ago, and it was really inconclusive. But right now, work culture has changed so much, and some of the ways that we do things need a little time to settle. So I am definitely not one for delaying conversations. I just want to make sure that if we can do some surveys, to get some data, to do things where we really ask people the many different things that they're doing with the calendar, we may want to make some different arrangements. I mean, Connecticut as a state, I think we know our school systems try to rotate which weeks the kids have off, because then we can help for people who are having staycations and things like that. We can help infuse, patronage to some of the businesses in the community, the Seaport, all these places that rely on vacationing families. That's why it's staggered. But there's all kinds of other things that come up. So I just didn't want to look at it as one piece of the puzzle. So I guess to answer your question, I don't know how long. I guess this means we've got 2 calendars ahead of us. So sometime,
Yeah, this is 22, 23. And
yeah. I just think we have an antiquated calendar, not just us, but in general, public school
well,
systems.
here's an opportunity to update it antiquated. You talked about parents and planning. I just want to remind you that the kids would be in school and there'd be no planning for the parents to have another day off to do something with them. The kids would be in school, giving you opportunity at the end, getting out earlier, cooler days. Remember, we talked about all this. We had a pretty robust discussion. I just don't want people to forget that. So, we're talking about air conditioning and the return on investment, how much that costs in the schools too. We got rid of February break and things like that, and now we're getting out earlier. Started a little later in September, so there's a lot of discussion that took place last time. And I just don't want people to forget about it. And it's that piece of kids get out earlier, the less air conditioning that has to be going. They're going to school later, getting out earlier. These are, we had a pretty robust discussion about it, I thought. And, this is 22, 23. This is not something that parents can't plan for. So I don't want to get wrapped around the axle about how, parents can't plan for. And I just want to remind everybody that this is enough planning process for us to go forward with. We're not making a change for this next year.
Yeah, I just don't, even just thinking
Hold
about.
on, I just want to interject real quick and let both of you know that there's going to be some other folks who also have questions. And so I think, Mark, your point is well taken, that this calendar that we're looking at now is not for this coming fall. It's for the one after that. That does leave us plenty of time for families to plan if there are any changes that are accepted tonight or in the future. So if it's okay, with your indulgence, I'd like to move on to Jason, who put a question mark in the box.
Yeah, okay. Can y'all hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think, as we've said from many times, in discussion of pandemic education, the students are, best served when they're in school. And I completely agree, that there's, that we want to, honor that in any way that we can. And the prospect of eliminating Indigenous Peoples Day, strikes me in a couple different ways. First, I feel that that in the recent change from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples is a really strong message about the values that that the district has, and that those kinds of corrective gestures, while there isn't a religious dimension to Indigenous Peoples Day the same way that maybe we could say Yom Kippur has a religious practice behind that particular day, and is a part of a season of celebration and religious practice. So this is a different kind of break in the schedule. It's a different kind of naming and honoring, and so I would feel that there would be a dimension of erasure that would happen with the elimination of the holiday should that pass, right? At a moment when there is the nation is in a turning point of reckoning with many of these kinds of reminders of old thinking, and so I think that I would feel a sense of loss that victory for all of us to recognize Indigenous Peoples Day would somehow kind of lose its purchase on the community. But on the other hand, I do believe that them being in school, and having a much more robust and determined curriculum that addresses it not just on, say, 1 week, but that would incorporate, say, land acknowledgements in every day's opening announcement, that would incorporate learning curricula from our tribal communities and other Native communities outside of Connecticut. I think there's a real value in bringing in those kinds of learning, that would do more than what naming a holiday could do. While I celebrate the transformation from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, in some ways that doesn't do the work that I hope it would do for our culture, for our schools. Just the change of a name doesn't really, doesn't have the kind of sticking power that a more broad-based or curricular approach, programmatic approach. And so if that calendar item is on the table, I would want it to be a part of a much bigger kind of commitment to incorporate Indigenous peoples into across multiple dimensions. There we have existing policy 1700, which deals with the nicknames of the high schools, and in there is policy around the incorporation of Native studies as a dimension to how the district will be addressing many issues related to Indigenous peoples and Native folks in the state. So we already have a really strong direction there, and I think bringing up the calendar issue for me is really about that topic more than it is about whether or not that we should eliminate the holiday. Happy to expand more, but that's kind of those are some of the thoughts that I have about it. Sort of ambivalent, but we really want it to be representative of the commitment of the district.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Liz? And then Lorna.
So as far as I know, we still haven't received word of whether remote learning days are going to count next year. Is that right? So that I brought that up last meeting, that we discussed this, because for me, that's a piece of this whole puzzle that I would like to know before making a determination on this calendar. Just because I feel like we can really take control of the calendar once we know whether those days will count. And basically we will know our end date of school. So that kind of gives us flexibility on, then if we took out Columbus Day, there's another day. So the kids do need breaks. So we need to we could be strategic about how we're going to plan those breaks.
Thank you. I mean, I would just encourage, for the purposes of this discussion and vote, that we move forward as if remote learning days will not count. We can always go back and make a change to this calendar later on, because again, we are like 18 months out from when this calendar would take effect. Lorna.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate this discussion. I appreciate the motion that was put out there. Certainly recall the robust discussions that were had that brought us to a place of transitioning from referring to that day from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day, and appreciated the conversation then as I do now. I think although it was phrased as eliminating Indigenous Peoples Day, I don't think that's what we're speaking about. And I certainly appreciated hearing how, if that were to be pursued, it would be important to, during the school day, to have some type of curriculum or learning to further explore this topic, subject area. And we certainly know it's a subject area that is not to be discussed just on one day. It's something to recognize its value and presence year round. But in regard to this particular motion, my thoughts, again, I think it's important to recognize the significance of why there was such robust discussion to acknowledge Indigenous Peoples Day, and that there was a vote and that we passed it. And I think that speaks volumes. And for that, this was the first time on our school calendar that we were able to recognize that day in October as being Indigenous Peoples Day. That's a day, as my colleague, Dr. Chang, made reference to, but there's so much more learning that has to go in addition to that. It's a concurrent process. It's the day, but it's also the learning. And so with that, with a next step, if the next step were to be to keep the calendar as is, we still have learning to do. The learning still needs to take place. If our next step were to stay in school that day, the learning still has to take place. So I think the matter, the subject it's layered, and there's still layers that we have to peel off to really get to the crux of why we still have to emphasize that we need to learn more and that we need to educate more and others about that. So because there's so many still moving pieces happening, at this juncture, my thoughts are to keep it as is while we can currently plan, make a more planful way of how to pursue our next step. Even recognizing how the calendar is 2 years out, I still think we have lots of planning to do. And certainly the climate of what's been going on in our society at present acknowledges the relevance of planning, the relevance of having to continue to peel the layers and have these conversations. So appreciative that with this being put out there as an option, that there was recognition of the learning, of the acknowledgement of Indigenous people and the culture. And for myself at this time, I prefer to leave it as is, but certainly am receptive to the concurrent planning and discussing of things to come.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? If not, I think we should maybe do a roll call vote. It might just be too hard to ascertain who's voting yes or no. If we
Deb, I can make it easy and remove the motion.
okay. So as the seconder, I will also withdraw my motion. Thank you. Are there any other motions for amending the calendar? If not, we will vote on the calendar as it's listed in our board booklet. And I will try your minds. All those in favor of adopting this calendar for the 2022-23 school year, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
And all opposed, say nay. Abstentions? The ayes have it and the calendar is adopted. Thank you. We do not have any new business on the calendar this evening. We'll move on to staff communications and reports and start with the superintendent's report. Welcome, Tom.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, so tomorrow's a big day. In a lot of ways, it's like I guess it'd be our third or fourth reopening day, depending on how we look at this year. Just a lot of work's been done to get ready. Really appreciate the teachers, our custodial staff, as we've gotten things ready in the classrooms. Our principals doing a lot with scheduling. There's certain things we had to do where some classes had grown and there was a little rebalancing that had to happen before we could get to this point. We're ready to bring everybody back tomorrow, but it is, I am deeply gratified to say that we are all back tomorrow. This has been a long calendar year, certainly. And, I say that with today being the 16th, today was the first day we missed school last year. So for it to be a calendar year and for tomorrow, there is a certain symmetry for everybody to be back. And it has been a long year. And I will say that I think West Hartford Public Schools has, if we look at total instructional time in the building and time with peers, I think we've done, I'm very proud of the job that we've done in order to keep some semblance of that togetherness with peers, keeping kids in school together. There was a lot of pressure at December and a lot of pressure in January to move away from that and go virtual. We haven't done that, and things are looking up now. And it's very good to have our kids coming back, being together. And, this is, I think at this point, tomorrow will be the largest district in the state to have fully back with that percentage of our kids back, certainly. So very good news. More good news, our technically third day of it, but our second weekend Friday vaccination clinic is this weekend, where we'll finish up with the rest of our staff. So by March 19th, all of our teachers will have received at least their first shot. And for this one, there'll be a follow-up in April. This time we have the Moderna vaccine. So again, very good news for our staff. And looking forward to getting that completed. I want to congratulate Abby Aita and Grace Samuel, who both are moving on to the National DECA competition after winning in the state to Hall students. So that's very good news. And of course, with the passage of the American Recovery Act, the town will be receiving about $25 million on the municipal side, and we'll be getting about $10 million on our side, $10 million over the next 2 years, in addition to what we've already received, to be invested in. The Senate, when they did pass it, was a little bit different than the congressional language. They did put in some more stringent, not to supplant. There's some direct language of what it cannot be used for, specifically in that bill. So we can have more discussion about that as relates to the budget. As we get more information, we'll talk more about what kind of expenditures we will need. So with that, just getting ready now for the last 3 months, basically. There's 3 months left in this school year from now forward, and hopefully all of our kids being back, other than those that have elected to be an RLE for the year. We can see some optimism. We can see some events coming back and our principals and PTOs are working on those events at all levels. That will really build more of that community spirit within their schools. And I've had so many teachers reach out saying how excited they are. Somebody sent me a text right at the end of their school day today. Thank God all of our kids are back tomorrow, which was just a great message to receive. I've had kids say the same thing. So I look forward to seeing that our hallways more full again tomorrow. So that's it for me.
Thank you. I know I'm really excited too about everybody coming back in. Being in the same building, it feels like a very optimistic action to take. Does anyone have any questions for Tom? Amanda?
Hi, I share everyone's sentiments, so I won't repeat them, but I just had two quick questions just on logistics. My own kids were curious, which is what got me thinking about it for tonight. Can you update the community on the buses? So I know we're getting a lot of messages as parents about traffic patterns, and do you have any kids who are requesting to take the bus, or are we really going to see a surge of car-related? I know kids will take bikes as we go on, but.
We anticipate, much like at the elementary level when we started back in, that we'd see more cars this year and more vehicle traffic at the schools than will buses. Certainly we've learned from buses with the ventilation. There was more fear about buses maybe at the beginning of the year than just about anything else. And as time's gone on, we've seen quarantines from buses, but we haven't seen case-to-case spread, certainly in buses. But with that being said, I understand a lot of parents will be driving their kids to school. And frankly, at the high schools, this is the time of year when traffic picks up because you have not just seniors driving to school, but you have juniors by the second half of the school year that also drive in and have their cars. So at the high school, we'll see that. At the middle school, we'll see a little bit more vehicle traffic. So again, just hope that people are patient tomorrow, because usually these first days transportation is something that we see some struggles with or slowdowns till people get used to those patterns. But it's the same patterns they'll have used previously.
But if the kids want it, like say you have some kids who maybe at the beginning of the year wouldn't have felt comfortable taking the bus, but now, given what we know, think, yes, I'm comfortable riding the bus to school. Can they do that? Is that an option?
Yeah, they can. We haven't seen a lot of that, to be honest with you, but we didn't see a lot of people notify us that they wouldn't be either. So, we kind of had to reserve those spots anyway. So it's not a large number either way. It's very small, actually.
Okay. And have you gotten a lot of communication from any of the kids who are in after-school sports about having trouble getting back to campus?
No, that's not something that has tended to be a problem. And we'll have situations in place. We'll have study hall areas and areas in the cafeteria for kids that can eat, so that they'll be that time in between, they can fill their time and stay at school. They don't have to leave the campus in the same way they had previously for sports.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right, thank you. And thanks to the whole team for pulling this all together and getting our schools ready and our staff ready for our students to all come back tomorrow. All right, we'll move on to staff reports and board discussions. And our first presentation will be the 2020 school day SAT results. So I'll welcome Paul and Ann to join us.
Thank you very much, Deb, Superintendent Moore. Good evening, board members. Pleasure to present to you. And as stated, I'm joined by Ann McKernan, our director, excuse me, our director of secondary education, and just a tremendous asset in our office. I'm going to share my screen with the PowerPoint. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you so much.
And I'll just ask, since we usually ask this, is this presentation available on our website, or will it become available after the meeting?
Yeah, we can make this PowerPoint available on the website, but I think it'll be important. One of the things we'll talk about tonight is really some of the differences of the 2020 administration of the school day SAT, how it differs from the past, and kind of how we look at the results, and try to identify trends and try to make interpretations from that. So you see the kind of the basic agenda that will follow, and we'll begin with very quickly just in the written report, we go through a little bit of a review of the test structure itself, the sections and scoring and the meaning. But the piece that I want to pause on just for a moment is the interpretation of the 2020 results. Because the school was technically closed down last year, during the time that we would administer the school day SAT, the close of the 2019-2020 school year happened without students taking it. And it was really leadership on the part of the state of Connecticut Department of Education to say they wanted to provide the opportunity for that free, no charge SAT to be able to happen in school for what would have been last year's juniors, this year's seniors, the class of 21. And so they made this test available on an optional basis for students in September, very early on in the school year. And I've sat on meetings with folks in leadership at the State Department asking districts kind of their input on how to report these scores. And they've come to some conclusions. They know because participation rates look different, and reopening of schools look different, closing of schools look different last year. They recognize that scores will be different, and it is difficult to understand how longitudinal trends, really interplay with these scores. And so their best caution is not to insert things into longitudinal trends. They will have to publicly, actually, they're not publicly reporting these scores at all because of the optional nature of it. But even our state assessments that are coming up for Smarter Balance that our students will take, they'll report them, but they're not necessarily looking to do some of the same longitudinal trends year after year. They're going to look at some 2-year growth measures and some things like that. So I wanted to just set that framework out early, that as I've given these results, I'm cautious about what some of the things might mean. And we have some very interesting gains, and we have some very interesting kind of dips within the data, but it doesn't necessarily equate to significant programmatic measures. I think a lot of that can be unpacked right from the pandemic itself. So all that being said, here on the slide, you see the major areas under the literacy component of the test, otherwise known as evidence-based reading and writing, and you see the major components on the mathematics. And I'd ask you to think about that, think about some of these components and really the nature of curriculum, how it's taught. Literacy is taught within a spiraled curriculum, focusing on very similar type skills, big picture skills, reading, writing, use of evidence, words in context. And that spirals year after year and gains in depth as the students grow older. In mathematics, things are much more compartmentalized, if you will. The curriculum itself is much more sequential. And I think we see some of that impact when we look at our scores, when we think about the interruption to school back in March a year ago, and then taking the test first thing in September after some summer being away, and certainly after a full quarter of school not being in person. So we'll talk through those. But at the end of the day, there is a college and career ready benchmark. You'll see those scores. The scores themselves are normed, and they range in points from 400 to 800 points per test. A 480 is the literacy benchmark. Mathematics has had a higher benchmark, 530, and both of those benchmarks are based on a 75% probability that a student achieving that score would be able to earn a grade of C or higher within a first semester college course, within a related subject area. So that's where those come from. The fact that one is higher than another may simply speak of the fact that I'm not sure if it's more challenging to achieve that C or better in a college level math class, I guess. But those are the college and career ready benchmarks. So here on the slide, and this is a little bit of a busy slide, so I'll describe it. We're looking at our raw scores, and we'll just do raw scores for a moment, and then we'll translate into the percentage of students who made the benchmark. In blue, you see the previous 4-year average for raw scores for literacy on the left, and mathematics is the right side of that chart. And you see the horizontal line indicating the benchmark score. So you see essentially, where scores average out year after year, and where the benchmark lies. To the right of the blue, you then see a set of orange bars that are very close in height, and that is the DIRG-B average previous 4 years. And then in gray, you see the state average. For this current year, I chose, based on advice of the state and everything else, I chose not to just create a bar chart that would just land alongside of it, because we're not going to try to draw those same conclusions longitudinally, but I did want to share the numbers. And for West Hartford in literacy, our average score was a 573. And so you see that's very much in keeping, if you can look to the blue and really by comparison to the DIRG and the orange, you can see it's very comparable, very comparable, very competitive. We don't actually have the DIRG score because the state is not releasing these scores. Those DIRG averages will not be available to us for the 2020 administration. But the state average is available, and the state average was a 527 for literacy. And again, comparable to what the state average has been in the past, slightly above for both us and for the state where it was. But again, is that necessarily a reflection of anything programmatic? Is that a reflection of participation rates? Those are some of the bigger questions where we're hesitant to draw any dramatic conclusions. And then parallel to that, over on the right-hand side, you see our average score in mathematics for West Hartford at a 552, very close to where we have been in the past, perhaps a couple of points lower. And again, you see the state average at about a 505. So in the ballpark, but not dramatically different. But again, were it, then that would be a question. So what I'd like to do, and how it was really presented in your written report, was looking at the percentages. And so in your written report, you saw that as a district, 81% of our students met that college and career ready benchmark of a 573. That 81% is on par with our previous 4-year average, which had been a 79.1%. If I were to take that blue line that is there, and if I were to average it across 4 years, that would have been 79.1%. And we're glad that we're in that same neighborhood. We're glad that we're even slightly above it, but we're not taking any credit for being slightly above it, just given the unusual nature of scores this year. Likewise, the orange line that is there just demonstrates that historically we've been very competitive within our DIRG. In fact, overall, our literacy scores have generally placed us in the top third of districts, and certainly among the top large comprehensive high schools. But again, we don't have DIRG average for this year, and we're not necessarily making those comparisons. In mathematics, equally, for the given year, we had 59% of our students meet the college and career ready benchmark. Our previous 4-year average was 60%. So again, overall, our math is very much where we would probably expect it to be. The one thing, to be perfectly transparent to note is that this year we were 17 points above the state average. Historically, we're about 20 points above the state average. So slightly less aggressive than we have been in terms of our mathematics. So it's just, we're looking at kind of what to make of that overall. Historically, we'll disaggregate our performance among the high needs group. And the high needs group is a category defined by the state of students that are receiving special education services, English language learners, and economically disadvantaged students as identified by participation in our free or reduced price lunching program. You can see essentially the full measure of the bar on any one of these graphs is where West Hartford performs overall. You can see that historically we had in the neighborhood of 55% of our high needs population achieving benchmark. This past year we had 56.2%. You can see the comparison, what's in blue, somewhere on the tail end of that, somewhere near 35% of students at the state level achieving that benchmark. So we were actually, for our high needs group, if you averaged across the 4 years, the 56%, very, very close to, but exceeding where we had been in 17, 18, 19, and about 5 points above our previous 4-year average. Again, not going to make a lot of conclusions about that just based on the differences in the participation rates among our high need population this year versus last year.
Paul, will you just explain, how the state categorizes high needs completely?
Certainly. So again, the high needs population is any student who is identified in any one of the following 3 categories. Students receiving special education services, English language learners, students in our ESOL program, that is to say, and economically disadvantaged, as identified by students who participate in the free or reduced lunch program. If you are in one or more of those categories, that is defined as high needs. And realistically, we've done this achievement gap and opportunity gap analysis in the past, but when you disaggregate based on those realistic and the driver of that in terms of the sample size for us as a district, the biggest driver is economically disadvantaged. All of our achievement gap data and all that surfaces really seems to be influenced more by socioeconomics than by race ethnicity, and the state found that as well, which is why they went to this as their categorical analysis, although they do maintain looking at things by race and ethnicity, which we will come to in a moment in another slide. So again, the previous 4-year trend, a standalone statistic for our current graduating class, only 26% of our high needs students met that college and career ready benchmark on mathematics. So we see that we definitely took a dip there from last year. We had been enjoying, as the graph really demonstrates, significant growth in mathematics. And while that 26.4 certainly stands out, it is not a conclusion of a programmatic shift or a dramatic shift. We're not making that conclusion, again, based on the fact that we did not have our full complement of students in our high needs categories participate in the test. And in terms of disparity of who participated in our school day SAT and who did not, we recognize that our high needs students participated much less frequently than other students. And so it is unclear what our actual performance for either literacy or math might have been. Moving on, we don't shy away. We talk about the fact that really it is socioeconomics that seems to drive a lot of our achievement gap, but we don't shy away from our analysis of achievement by race. Just for context, I know at my last presentation, it was certainly asked to make certain that I include our Asian American population within the statistic. And so I gave that some ink in this written report, but I wanted to show for the historical trends what you had seen before for students of color, which for this purpose is defined as our Black students, our Hispanic students, and our students of 2 or more races. So historically, that subgroup of students had a sizable gap of about 35 points for literacy or mathematics from their white peers. There is a gap, as mentioned in the report, typically for our Asian students. Our Asian students have had historically about a 10-point gap in their literacy scores, and somewhere between a 5-point gap or perhaps no gap within mathematics as you look across the years. The performance of our students of color were up overall, and tried to place those statistics somewhat in the neighborhood of where that dot might have landed if we were going to be drawing, a trend line, which we're not. It's obviously, very interesting to take note of some of the interesting details of the data, the fact that the performance of our groups, with the exception of that high needs group in mathematics, seems to show some minor increases, or perhaps even some fairly significant increases across either our whole group or subgroups. But again, without the full complement of students available, we're hesitant to make the sweeping conclusions about our performance overall. In general, just for your knowledge, though, the gap between our students of color, as defined here, and their white peers, reduced to in the neighborhood of about 25 points from the typical 35 points. So it's about 10 points less of a gap. But again, I think that has more to do with some of our high needs population not participating in the test at this time, when you really consider it a test for all students. Additional resources, and this will be available for families and the public on the web, some links that can bring you directly, but at this point, I'd be happy to open it up for questions and discussion. And in order to see you, if it's okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, otherwise I can't.
Sure thing. Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. Are there questions? Okay. All right, great. Well, last chance. No one has any questions? Oh, Liz and then Ari.
Just had a quick question, Paul. The benchmark scores, do you know what percentile they are?
So the benchmarks, the 480 for literacy and the 530 for math. Oh, do I know what national percentile they are? You know what? I can get that. I don't have that off the top of my head. Obviously, the 500 is the mean. So I believe that the scores are set so that 50% of students are achieving at that 500 level, but I don't have the very specific change to that, although I could owe you that as an answer.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
I was just wondering, Paul, this is probably a larger conversation, but just off the top of my head, I mean, the first thing that I think about is, over the years, there's been this consistent gap in both literacy and mathematics for the high needs population students. I'm just wondering, as a district, given that we know this and we have this data in terms of data-driven interventions, are there things that we can do as a district to address these gaps, to kind of close the gap?
Certainly, I mean, the one thing that we had been very excited to present to you in the past had been our ability to close the gap specifically in mathematics. Mathematics had become a named area of focus, and these interventions that are necessary don't just live obviously within the 11th grade. And right. So this 4-year trend prior to this year within mathematics really demonstrated some significant growth for us as a district in closing that gap, and our work is ongoing. And I believe we talked and we presented about mathematics coaches at the middle school. We presented on kind of some of the things that we're doing in the past with SRBI, so we can talk further about those things. But I do believe that a number of our efforts are pointing us in the right direction. And this was one of the things that we've been the most excited about prior to this year. The fact that math itself did not carry forward, the same general trend. Like, we're looking at numbers and we're seeing, hey, we're generally in the ballpark of where we've historically been until we get to the high needs performance, the performance of the high needs students in mathematics. And it's certainly not the news that we're excited to present, but it's understandable in some regards that when you think about the sequential nature of math programming and the idea that you go back to what are those 4 big areas in math that are on the SAT. So heart of algebra, that's really kind of the guts of what you're in a freshman algebra class. That what they call passport to advanced mathematics. That's a lot of the stuff that lives in algebra 2. That truthfully are high need students, when you look at their participation and what courses they land in, that's the stuff that they're really trying to get to in their 11th grade year, or if they're out of phase by a year, even in their 12th grade year. So it's everything we can do to have them as well prepared as possible. And then when our year gets cut off, essentially in March, and we lose that whole quarter plus the summer for this higher needs group, it really explains to me the largest part of where we've lost, at least in this general trend idea, the impact of COVID on our neediest learners. When I disaggregate out those students to, the larger percentage of the population, the picture is not all that atypical. So it points us very, very specifically into the direction that we need to be working with our neediest learners, and it is those learners this year, a significant percentage of them who haven't necessarily been back to the schools full time or in person. And so we've done, as we've done certain things along the way to include, the purple cohort kids early on that we said, if you're going to be in, we can't have you out at a week at a time. We've had students within the RLE where if their participation hasn't been solid and hasn't been consistent in the remote environment, that we've referred back to attend at the building to say, look, we're concerned about you, we're concerned about your success, and we're going to be able to provide for you better. But overall, it speaks to a lot of things that we'll be talking about in terms of how we want to use the additional ESSER funds for some summer programming and some additional tutoring and additional math coaching positions next year. So I know that is work that is ongoing in our offices and things that we will be continuing to present to you on through the remainder of this year.
Thank you.
Anne, do you want to chime in?
I just wanted to add to the response to the board member's question. We certainly have put a lot of time and effort in the last few years in the middle school programming that has, we hoped, have contributed to some of these gains, and that is to deliver some high quality resources that are, I would say, kind of non-negotiable in the way that we have some very high level programs that we have done with the kids that give us dipstick measures along the way. And all the children, whether they're in an honors math class or in a developmental math class, are using these, some at different levels, but they are exposed to them and we are able to track their efforts. Paul and I do a lot of analysis of how the students are doing in our developmental math classes, our standard math classes, because algebra readiness, as Paul pointed out, is really a crucial piece by 9th grade. So we track closely, are the kids ready for algebra? Are some still in pre-algebra in ninth grade. And I was just looking at many charts today on how many students entered in pre-algebra and what we need to do for them. So I wanted to also point out the resources. I think they've been helpful. Paul and I have talked for a few years now about these math coaches and how we think we can use them. We have some models we think can be really, really helpful if we're lucky enough to get these math coaches that we're looking for. The algebra, the ninth grade algebra is kind of like third grade reading. We know that that's a very important measure along the way. So we're very key in looking at who is, the vast majority of our kids do get to algebra by ninth grade, but the group that isn't getting there, what is that 6, 7, 8, and I hope 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 program look like so that they can hit algebra by ninth grade. Thank you for, just wanted to add those comments.
Other questions or comments? Yeah, I'll just say that for myself, I'll be really interested to see the results of next week's school day SATs, because those will reflect the academic achievement of the last year and the impact of the last year on our juniors. So I know we'll be having this discussion. The board will have this discussion again next March, and we may not know much until then, but I think that'll be really informative for us. Paul?
I got the answer to Ari's question, Liz's question, I think. The percentile ranks. So a 480 in the EBRW and the literacy component of the test puts you at about 37th percentile. It's below the 500, so it's below that 50th percentile. So it's a generally found to be an easier score to achieve, as I think that graph would have demonstrated. And the 530 in math is about a 55th percentile, so slightly above average, just as the 530 would indicate slightly above 500.
Thank you.
Lorna.
Yes, I was going to hold off, but Deb, you said something that triggered me to want to comment on this. First off, Paul, I just want to, and thank you so much again for your presentation. And I really appreciate you highlighting how, in terms of the definition of high needs, how it is not based on race. And I think that's important for many individuals who may think that high needs automatically assumes race is involved, and that may involve some other misinformed interpretation of that. So I say that because Deb, when you commented on curiosity, I'm sure all of us have, on how the results will be that we'll find out next year in terms of this year's impact. We certainly know that all that has transpired this year has exposed everyone to be susceptible to being vulnerable, to being potentially high needs. With the 3 areas that you defined, economically challenged is one area you spoke about. And we certainly know the pandemic has exposed many economic challenges to many households. So again, I appreciate recognizing how, when it comes to our vulnerable population, no one is immune to that. And certainly that just stresses even more why it's important for us to do all that we can to protect our young people and to try to have them to be as resilient as possible, even in the face of most difficult times and challenges. So thank you again.
If I could, Liz, just as a point of information on the benchmarks, what those represent are 75%. So the College Board does this long-term longitudinal study, and it represents 75% of the students reaching that benchmark get a C or better. So in math, it would be first semester credit bearing college course, algebra, stats, pre-calc, or calculus. And in the reading and writing, it would be credit bearing course, history, literature, social studies, or writing. So those are the numbers. So sometimes people are like, well, why the 530? Why the 480? Why did they decide that? They didn't really decide that. They just took the research over year after year and kind of combined it to say, this is what the number that typically leads to success in your college course. So just for a little more.
All right, thank you. All right, thank you so much for that report. We will move on to the personnel report. Rick?
Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to present our smallest personnel report of the year, which I think shows that things are starting to stabilize, at least from a staffing perspective as we head into the spring. This month's report has the hiring of 1 interim teacher and 1 approved leave of absence, which is, as I said, and as you know, as you've seen, our lowest and smallest of the year. As we head into the spring, we wanted to update the board on a few key leadership openings that we will begin recruiting for this week. But before we get to those recruitments, we wanted to talk through the superintendent's announcement of Dr. Chad Ellis as the new principal at Bristow Middle School. As you may remember, we had originally appointed Chad as the interim principal at Bristow last winter, just literally weeks before the pandemic had hit. And at that time, our plan had been to begin a full recruitment later that spring for the position. And we had actually met with the PTO and had started our focus group meetings with staff and parents to help us develop a leadership profile. Then, of course, everything came to a stop with the pandemic. And as we were planning later in the spring and starting to think through the summer and for the upcoming school year, we felt it was important that we had consistent leadership in each of our buildings. So we announced in June that Chad would remain the interim principal for the entire 2021 school year. And over the last year, Chad has shown himself to be a leader who really enjoys his time with students. He is there every morning welcoming students off the bus. He's there every afternoon, thanking them for their efforts during the day. He's driven and committed to seeing that Bristow students are successful and prepared for that next step at high school. Chad is certainly a leader who communicates well, is visible for staff and parents, and embraces the equity and inclusion focus of our district. It is for these reasons and many others that we had appointed Chad as a permanent principal about a week and a half ago. And I could say I've known Chad for 10 years now. And for anyone who knows him and has had a chance to talk to him, he has a pretty even disposition. Very subtle sense of humor, but he's very evenly keeled. But when he talks about the Bristow community, his face lights up like I've never seen. He's absolutely thrilled to be at Bristow, is inspired by the colleagues he gets to work with day in and day out, and looks forward to working with the staff and community to continue to make Bristow the special place that it is. So we just want to give Chad a big public congratulations on his new position. Now, in terms of other leadership recruitments, we do have several we will be posting this week. One is the one we've talked about over the last couple of meetings, and that is our Director of Pupil Services position. And certainly we have whoever fills that role has incredibly large shoes to fill. But we will be posting for that position tomorrow. And you may recall from last week's budget meeting that we do have a lot of moving pieces involved with our core academic department supervisor positions. And as we move into what we hope will be a more normal year next year, and we start moving folks back from positions that they held this year back into their original roles, we do have 2 department supervisor positions that we will be posting this week as well. So we have a vacant language arts position that's been open all year, and we have a vacant school counseling department position that has been vacant all year. As I said, both of these will be posted this week, and we expect the process for each of these openings to take a little over a month. So we should be able to report back to the board with the results of these recruitments later in April. And that summarizes this month's report. I'd be happy to answer any questions that the board had.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Amanda?
Hi, Rick. Thank you. How are we doing with classroom coverage?
We are actually, the last few weeks, Amanda, have gone much better than the earlier part of the year. So our substitute coverage has been, we've been filling rates at a much higher rate. Since the positivity rate has been dropping and the number of our teachers that are quarantining has been dropping pretty consistently over the last several weeks, we've had much better coverage in each of our buildings. So knock on wood, we're in a good place. And if things continue the way they are, it'd be great to see the year finish up where we are right now. As a matter of fact, that would be outstanding.
Is it also pretty consistent for our remote learners?
It is, yep, very consistent. It's been more consistent at the remote level. Obviously, teachers are working from home, even if they're maybe feeling a little under the weather at times. They can still, post online and get the lessons done. So, and we do have a couple more subs in the remote learning RLE as well for teachers to take advantage of. So it's been more consistent there, but it's been strong as well.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All right, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Moving on to routine matters, the approval of the minutes. I'm seeking a motion to approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of March 2nd, 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved, Jason.
Thank you, Jason. And a second, Amanda?
Second, yeah.
Is there any discussion? If not, I will try your minds. All those in favor of approving the minutes from the March 2nd, 2021 board meeting, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Abstentions? The ayes have it and the minutes are approved. Information and reports. Board members, communications and reports. Are there any reports from other boards and organizations? Not. We will move on. No other information and discussions. So we'll move on to the reports from our student board representatives, and we will start with Conard tonight and Rashil.
Hello, everyone. So as we all know, tomorrow begins the return of full in-person for the high schools, and we as students have been looking forward to the day where we all can be back together, and we are so glad and grateful that it is happening a lot sooner than expected. Both teachers and my peers are really excited for the return, especially because for many of us, it has been more than a year since we've seen our friends and classmates in the other cohort in person. I really feel and I'm really excited that it's going to be a wonderful and special end to the school year, both academically and socially, bringing light into what has been a very difficult year. I just wanted to thank everyone from the board to the teachers, administrators, and other staff for making this possible. On that note, the senior class board has finalized 3 different venue locations for the senior prom, and selecting which location is just a matter of whichever one feels most comfortable. Again, we're so grateful for the opportunity to have a prom as celebration. On last Friday, the March Chieftain Award recipients were recognized virtually. These are students recognized by the Conard teachers and staff for their hard work throughout the year. Conard this year has had a number of successful fundraisers, and most recently, members of the Conard DECA Club had successfully collected a number of egg cartons that were dropped off at a local farm fresh stand. This Saturday, members of the Conard musical production will be filming this year's musical, The Little Woman, the Broadway musical. Actors and members of the pit orchestra will have the opportunity to invite 2 guests to watch the performance live. We hope that members of the community will continue to support the musical as they have done so in years past by renting the musical video when it becomes available. This Friday, March 19th, Conard is acknowledging World Down Syndrome Day, where everyone is invited to help promote awareness and inclusion of Down syndrome by wearing blue and yellow or creative socks. Next Wednesday, March 24th, is the school day SAT, which will be taking place for juniors, and all other students are going to be remote on that day. And lastly, winter sports are wrapping up, where each sport has an opportunity to play a version of a tournament. Thank you.
Thank you. Lily.
Thank you. As the winter sports season wraps up, spring sports are just getting started at Hall. Spring sports registration opened last week, and some teams have just begun their preseason conditioning this week, but the official season will start on March 27th. Usually, Empty Bowls host their 24-hour famine event every spring, but this year, Community Service Club and Empty Bowls are teaming up to host a 24-day food drive from March 3rd to March 24th and to replace the 24-hour famine event. All food donations will be given to Grace Seventh-day Adventist Church through FoodShare. Hall Junior Nora Holmes has been selected as a finalist in the New York Times Writing Contest, answering the prompt, "What has it been like to be a teenager during the first year of historical pandemic?" Her poem, Plums, was selected out of 5,500 submissions to be one of the about 200 finalists. Two Hall musicians, Amelia Karuk and Amruth Naranjan, have been selected to join the National Association for Music Education's All-National Honor Ensemble. Congratulations to both of them. And finally, Hall staff and students will celebrate World Down Syndrome Day this Friday, March 19th, although World Down Syndrome Day is actually on March 21st, by wearing crazy, colorful socks. Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck to any of the students taking the SAT next Wednesday. Our future business, we have several meetings coming up. I will announce the dates. Next Wednesday, we have our public hearing for our budget. This is the opportunity for members of our community to share their thoughts on our Board of Education budget for the upcoming year. You can join us on Google Meets to do that, followed by our second budget workshop. Then on Tuesday, April 6th, we will have a regular Board of Education meeting, and the main agenda item will be adoption of the budget. And then on April 20th, we have another regular Board of Education meeting. Are there any requests for future agenda items? And have any new visitors joined us that would like to make any comments this evening? I don't think I see anybody. Okay, so no comments from visitors. We do not have an executive session, and so I will seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you, Lorna. And any second?
Second.
Thank you, Ari. Meeting is adjourned at 8:29 p.m. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.